What's up, y'all? It's your boy KRS, and today I'm bringing you the definitive guide for Arms Warrior in 11.2 for PvP. Arms is looking a lot better than it did last season. Arms and Fury are kind of doing similar damage, but I think Fury's doing more damage, honestly. But Arms still has a spot in the season where it actually finally feels viable, and it's not just like a paper mache that has to sit in D-stance the entire game while it literally hits like a wet noodle. Our sustain damage is a lot higher, our execute damage is a lot higher, and we don't have to rely on Demolish to actually be able to force kills anymore, which feels pretty nice. But besides that, I think we're in a pretty decent spot if you want to play Arms. So let's get right into it. As far as the stats, you're going to be running Versatility. You're pretty much going to want to run full Versatility, the maximum amount. There's an add-on, I don't remember what it's called, but I'll find it, put it in the description so you can see all the maximum stats, the name of it, so you can find it on CurseForge. But you're pretty much going to run max first. Arms is still squishy in my opinion. It has less health than Fury, and it doesn't have active healing, and Ignore Pain is still garbage in my opinion. It's basically nothing. One hit, it's basically gone. It's not like it used to be where it used to do a ton of preventable damage. Now it's whatever. But let's get right into this. So, Versatility, Haste, Mastery, crits being your worst. You already have a ton of crit for the abilities that matter and how Arms functions, especially with all the modifiers on your critical strike damage that is modified by your execute damage with Slayer, which feels pretty good. And I do have a Colossus build, but again, you're still going to want to mid-max your haste and still get a ton of rage. But there is that. So, just to get straight into it, I'll explain some of how this works. So, you get Reap the Storm from using Sweeping Strikes and your Mortal Strike. It does a lot of damage, so, and this puts an Overwhelmed stack on the target. So here's the thing. When you use Overwhelmed, or when you get Overwhelmed, you have more chances of your tier to go off. Execute damage is increased by 10, and executes from sudden death have a 10% chance per stack of Overwhelmed on the target to trigger a Slayer strike at 100% effectiveness. Of course, that's reduced. But the thing is when you actually use this ability, when you're actually going through your rotational abilities, so like Mortal Strike, Overpower, and all that, you're going to have the chance to get trigger Reap the Storm from your Overpower. So you're going to have a lot more damage as you get the 4 set next week. I have tested it on the PTR, and it's actually, you get Reap the Storm actually quite a bit, and it actually helps get you a lot of Overwhelmed and Reap the Storm, and Reap the Storm is actually hitting for 75% of effectiveness, but that's just adding a little more damage. So let's say it's 400k in PvP combat on another plate wearer. It's going to stack up pretty quick, and you're going to be able to maintain that buff a lot of the time because it's basically like a Whirlwind, a little Blade Storm. So you're going to be able to debuff a lot of targets, especially if they're sort of stacked up, and it'll make your actual Reap the Storm damage a lot higher. Same for Fury. Still looking pretty good because you have Raging Blows. You have a lot of stuff that increases your damage. But it's one of those things. You have Impale, which increases the critical strike damage of your abilities by 10. But then you also have something called Critical Strike Chance increased by 2. And the critical strike damage of Execute is increased by 10. And then you have this talent here. Critical Strike Chance increased by 2. And the Execute immediately refunds 20% of the rage spent. And I don't like the bleeds at all with this build because you have other things. You have Slam to use, which is actually hitting for a lot of your damage this patch. Execute increases the execute damage dealt by 3 for 12 seconds, stacking up to 15 times. When you actually get this in PvP, and you can get this because you are executing a lot, you can get this super fast over the course of the game. You tend to get this pretty quickly because you actually do get a lot of executes as Slayer. So you can get this up to even, let's say, 6 stacks, and now your executes are doing, what? God, I can't even math today. 12% more damage, plus they're critting harder because of everything else that's going on. And with everything else, when you do get marked for execution increases the critical strike chance and critical strike damage of your next execute by 15%, which also stacks with Impale, which also stacks with Cruel Strikes. So it's pretty nasty, especially if it crits, because that's a 45% chance. So you're pretty much always going to get crits, right? So the way that I would like to do my rotation, and let me just tell you about the enchants real quick. You can either run Mastery or Haste or Versatility. That's my opinion. I like Mastery a lot more, but I have the Versatility one, I believe, on there now. But speed on the bracers, speed on the cloak, speed on the boots, and just the typical enchants: 930 strength and stamina, and crystalline radiance. Those are gonna be all your big enchants. Rings, I like the mastery enchants, so the curse mastery, and I've kind of been playing with the things, kind of seeing where all the math leads, but I'll probably go into mastery and versatility or something like that, because I already pretty much have max haste anyway, so I want more just raw damage as far as going on my abilities, and it's pretty much the same priority as Fury. Get 30% haste, and then you can mid-max other stats for what you think will be good. That's just kind of my 2 cents. That's kind of where I like to sit, is about 30% haste, because it works for Fury, works for arms. So there is that. So as far as the burst damage, here's how I typically do it. So I'll use Sweeping Strikes, I'll Colossus Smash, and I'll Blade Storm. But usually I'll Mortal Strike before that and then use it. So I already have 2 stacks of my Sudden Death. And as you can see, I'm getting Sudden Deaths really quickly. I don't have Mortal Strike, I'm going to use Slam. Mortal Strike's on cooldown. No Mortal Strike, no executes. I'm using Slam to fish for for overpowers, and that's pretty much just your whole rotation. Is that use Mortal Strike on cooldown? The reason is just because it's actually a big core of your damage. So, and you get Reap the Storm from it, so you're just able to maintain stacks. And as you can see, we're already at 5 stacks of Ashen Juggernaut up there on the right. And people do tend to get lower, and you do tend to take damage, so rage will not be a problem with this build. And when someone does get low, you're able to just spam execute with this build, because you're getting so much more rage back from your actual execute, so you're able to just be offensive the entire game and just be a complete nuisance. And pretty much Blade Storm does enough damage now in PvP where it's actually is killing people, so that feels nice. But that's pretty much the same thing. Same thing with Colossus Smash, or with Colossus. You're pretty much just going to be... The only difference is it has bleeds, so you're just going to maintain your bleeds. And I do like Skull Splitter with it, where you get the extra bleed damage. It's like 100%. It's like 100% increase speed on the bleeds going out. So I'll show you the... I just call it demo. So I was playing with some Leech, but you're going to... I would say for arms, you're definitely going to want this here. Your auto attacks generate 10% more rage. It's just a lot better. But okay, so with this build, you're full bleeds. And you're going to use Skull Splitter. So when you actually use Colossus Might, which is the stacks that you get from using Mortal Strike and getting this basically stacked up, and it's like a huge damage increase over. And overall, it'll actually increase your bleed damage. So pretty much the way that you'll do it, there's a few ways to do it to like prep for it, right? You can just charge your target, and then immediately follow up with a Blade Storm, get them slowed, just as an example, so you can get those max stacks really quickly. And now, like what I like to do, it's really simple. I've got everything on them. I'm going to pop all my cooldowns. I'm going to demo, then I'm going to Skull Splitter, and then I'm just going to do my normal rotation of, is Mortal Strike on cooldown? Okay, it's not. I'm going to use it, right? So this is it's basically the same thing, but you don't have to prioritize execute as much. You can still use sudden deaths, but pretty much all I'm doing is I'm prioritizing Mortal Strike all the way, because I have that 15% damage increase from it, and using everything when I have it. So when I burst again, It's pretty much the same thing, right? And I use Skull Splitter because I have that extra damage from it. I use it right after, so I guarantee I have rage to spend. Because Skull Splitter gives you rage. And this is pretty much your whole thing. Use sweeping strikes on cooldown, especially if you're cleaving. You want to be able to get as many of those stacks back as possible, because it actually reduces the cooldown. So once you have 10 stacks, you're just going to be knocking the cooldown off of Demolish. And that's pretty much just your whole basic thing. And I like to use Skull Splitter, not necessarily on cooldown. I like to use it paired with all my bleeds and stuff, so it's actually increasing all of my damage as fast as possible. All my bleed damage, because it actually is a huge damage increase, even if you are running it alone without using Colossus Smash. Just as an example. But as you can see, I'm able to pretty much just have my bleeds up all the time. And I will sometimes I will use it off cooldown, just so I can have more rage to spend. And pretty much whenever I have those 2 stacks, I'm just going to want to use everything I can and get all my rage back. And this is pretty much my whole rotation right here. Using Colossus Smash and cooldown. I don't really care. We're going to use Skull Splitter, Dragon Roar. And pretty much you just, whatever you have, you're just going to be using cooldowns to get all your stuff back. I have Demo again. Of course, you should pair it with Colossus Smash. It just feels better. You deal a lot more damage that way. But I wasn't doing a lot of stuff, but here's my deep wounds damage. Yeah, it is a lot higher. It is a lot lower in PvP, but your bleeds are still pretty damn high once you look at things. But you can see Slam is actually hitting pretty hard. I would say this build works into a lot of classes, especially other warrior class, especially warriors. Can work into rogues, but I still like Slayer just because Slayer has, it feels a lot smoother. When you're using all the bleeds, it feels a lot blockier as arms, I guess. It just doesn't feel that great. I don't particularly care for it, but overall, this does feel pretty good. And with all the haste you're going to have and whatever stats you don't need, as far as the max amount of haste and the max amount of versatility you're going to want as arms, that's pretty much where you're going to go. You're going to go all into mastery. Whatever you don't need. Like, so full gems, mastery, versatility, and then you're pretty much just going to run full-on haste mastery in all your gear, and whatever you don't need mastery or haste on, or versatility and haste, you're just going to run mastery on it. You're not going to need all the extra stats from everywhere else because you already have max stats for everything else, right? So that's pretty much how the Colossus Smash build works. You still get Slam every now and again, but I feel like you get a lot more overpowers with Colossus. But crit, I think this patch for arms is completely useless. Oops, I changed the specialization. But let's just get into the PvP talent. So there's a few things you gotta realize as far as arms. There's, depending on the build you're running, you need to run Storm of Destruction, Blade Storm, Ravager, and Demolish. Now snare all targets by 60% for 6 seconds and increase their healing taken by 50% for 10 seconds. It's 25% PvP. Don't let that confuse you. And Sharp and Blade, obviously. Colossus Smash increases your next Mortal Strike damage to deal 15% increased damage and reduce the healing taken by 50% for 4 seconds. So you could like use Sharp and Blade right out of a Stormbolt on the healer, for example, and their DPS is low. That gets a lot of cooldowns as well. That does a lot as well. So that's 7 seconds of disruption on their heals, which is kind of cancerous when you think about. The only thing is, though, is when you actually use Colossus Smash and you get that Sharpened Blade, the one thing you want to be sure of, and this is what sets good warriors apart from bad warriors, is when you do use Sharpened Blade, you want to be able to have a Mortal Strike ready to be used when that falls off. Because you don't want downtime with no Mortal Strike, because then your pressure is going to lack, and then you're going to lose a lot of damage. So that is one thing to keep an eye out on. But as far as all the talents, you don't need to run Storm of Destruction. It just feels good, especially as arms. but there's a lot of things you can run. You can run duel, you can run disarm, you can run battlefield commander, you can run safeguard. So you could like safeguard your ally and then use die by the sword on like a melee cleave, for example, and actually eat their damage and just mitigate a lot of it because you can double intervene and that person will take 20% less damage for 5 seconds. So arms does still have a lot of like intervene, like is really strong with arms because you actually do have parry as arms, so that you can actually stop a lot of go damage from like a death knife, for example, because you can just intervene and just parry the apocalypse, or I parried the hunt on my healer, funnily enough, and reflected the damage, so that's pretty good. If you play like that, you can actually have a lot of momentum throughout the entire game just by cooldown trading that way. But I think Slayer's going to hands down take the lead just because of every time you use charge, it knocks off cooldown off of Heroic Leap by 2 seconds. And whenever you use Heroic Leap, it knocks cooldown down by 5 on charge. So I think Slayer's just going to be better. And plus, it's just the execute damage it's actually doing is absurd anyways. So it's just kind of one of those things where whenever you use Overpowered, and you're just going to get Reaps of the Storm, basically like that. It really adds a lot more damage to your class overall, even if it's only a 20% chance. Let's say you're still gonna get a lot because that's pretty much what you don't have Mortal Strike. You're gonna use Overpower. If you don't have anything, and pretty much using your execute on cooldown with sudden death, that's pretty much something else you're gonna want to do. So you could do like 2 executes back to back, 2 overpowers into a Colossus Smash for a huge Mortal Strike on the target into a Blade Storm, just as an example, and that will more than likely get the cooldown of everything else. And if you have Storm of Destruction, you don't have to worry about that Mortal Strike effect because it'll just put it on there for you. It'll put Mortal Strike on the target, the healing debuff, so you don't have to worry about not having a Mortal Strike on the target for, like, let's say 3 seconds. Especially in 3s, that's huge if you don't have one on someone, which feels really good because it denies a lot of healing, and it's not going to fuck you up. So, as far as that, when Overpower has its cooldown reset by Technician, your next Overpower deals 25% additional damage and 25% additional critical strike damage. This sounds crazy. Main reason why is because it actually modifies your Reap the Storm damage, and guess what? It also modifies off your Impale, which is insane. Mortal Strike, critical strikes increases the damage to your next Mortal Strike. That's crap. You don't have guaranteed critical strikes, but with Overpower, a lot of the time it feels like you do. It feels like Overpower actually crits a lot more. So, even if this doesn't go off, the thing is its cooldown is reset by Technician. You basically, if that crits, it's basically like a 50% damage increase plus a lot of other modifiers. It's just another ability that actually does okay damage, but then it can make it kind of nuts. Where I've had Overpowers hit for 2 million, 2.5 million. My executes are hitting for 2.5 million, 3 million. With Mortal Strikes that are hitting easily for 1.5, 2 million. Arms is hitting like a truck, and especially with all this haste and everything else, you're like non-stop damage, right? Especially all the modifiers in a Mortal Strike. But it's pretty much Mortal Strike, Execute are your main two that you're going to want to use, along with, using Overpower when you don't have Mortal Strike. And if you want to do big goes, 2 Overpowers, 2 Executes to get that 32% plus the 15 from 2 Overpowers, which with the Mortal Strike or a Colossus Smash and then a Sharpened Blade debuff, 15%, and plus all your blades, it's like a 130% damage increase on your Mortal Strike or something like that. It's well over 100. I know that much. And if it does crit, it can actually murder someone. So that's kind of funny to think about. But I think with arms, I've hit as much as 25 to 30% of someone's health like that in one punch, and pretty much into an execute, and they were dead. So that's one thing is arms. Like, if you can pair your things together, you can just do endless amounts of damage until someone's dead. But Slayer's definitely going to be your best in slot for arms. I know people like Demolish for that big one-shot damage, but so many classes can just straight up walk away from it, fade it from Priest, Demon Hunters just have to use dash. So you essentially are locked into using a stun in some sort of way to actually be able to lock it down. So that is one thing to think about. And actually, like pre-enraging a priest, because a lot of priests will actually trinket fear. And if you're not using pre-enrage, that's another thing. It's like, it's not guaranteed, so it doesn't feel the best, but make sure you're using it on people that are stunned. It helps a lot. So there is that. So those are just kind of the few things I have for arms that are actually doing pretty good, doing a lot of damage. But I'm glad I could show you guys this guide. But I would say as far as your talents, Sharpened Blade's basically a lock-in. You don't have to run Serum of Destruction, but again, it just feels really good. It just helps with all your damage because it locks them down. And you can't be slowed or immune, so it's another way to just kind of protect your damage and stay mobile on the target. And like if you get raided, you can play Storm into a Storm Bolt, and then what do you know? They're stuck there, and they can't knock you off. They can't peel you off, and you're cleaving with Blade Storm and putting overwhelming debuff on them up to 10. And you can get that with the Full Mortal Strike, and it is very nasty. It's a lot of damage, but again, Arms is one of those specs where they kind of nerfed it from Dragonflight tremendously. But glad I could bring this guide to you guys, and I hope you all have a good one. See you later. Goodbye.